Good day everyone, my name is Ian and for today we're going to discuss about the preference to circular architecture under the Classicism and the Greco-Roman tradition. To start our discussion for today, let us first define the Roman architecture. Classical Roman architecture, also referred to as ancient Roman architecture, is an architectural style that lasted from the establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 BCE to approximately the 4th century CE. After the 4th century CE, architecture began to transition into a period often classified as late antiquity. Roman architecture borrowed much from the ancient Greek and in turn influenced classical Greek architecture. Although Roman architecture has many unique elements, such as the arc and the dome, Roman and Greek architecture is sometimes considered a single architectural style known as classical architecture. And now let us know the history and overview of Roman architecture. Although Roman architecture is defined as beginning in 509 BCE, with the establishment of Roman Republic, the architecture of Rome was not particularly notable until the Roman imperial period began, only slightly before the beginning of the Common Era. This shift into a distinct Roman style was, in fact, a combining of architectural styles from the places, including Etruscan and Greek architecture, and with architectural advancement in the development of arches and later domes. There are few Roman buildings earlier than 100 BCE exists, even in ruins, though large numbers remain from later years and some are still largely intact and in use today. The next slides, we're going to talk about the examples of the Roman architecture. First is we have the Roman arch. So Roman arch marks an important development in Western architecture. Although the arch was not invented by the Romans and was in fact borrowed from the Etruscans, it was the Roman architectural revolution that promoted arches to mainstay in architecture. Along with the introduction of concrete, the use of arches was at the heart of Rome's ability to build massive projects across the empire. Arches, on the other hand, redirect weight out to the posts and down into the ground, and very little of the pressure of a building's weight is sustained by the top of the arch. Roman arches are round at the top, with a keystone at the apex, which helps to keep the other stones in place and redirects the weight of the structure to the posts. Instead of colonnades, Roman architecture often features arcades, or a series of rounded arches side by side. Next is we have the domes. The Romans were the first architects in history to fully utilize domes' ability to create expansive interior rooms. The Romans used domes in a wide range of structures, including bathhouses, temples, palaces, mausoleums, and subsequently churches. While domes can be traced back to ancient Mesopotamia, the massive domes known as monumental domes, while the domes associated with Roman architecture were initially built in Rome and the neighboring provinces in the 1st century BCE. Roman domes were hemispherical in design and frequently had a round aperture in the center known as oculi. Because constructions were no longer constrained by the width and shape of stone, the invention of Roman concrete aided in the advancement of the construction of massive domes. Next is we have the aqueducts. Many people consider the Roman aqueducts to be among the finest engineering achievements of antiquity. Originally constructed across the Roman Republic and then the Empire, their purposes was to transport water into towns and cities. These aqueducts provided water for farming, milling, and gardening, and public baths and fountain as well as the individual homes. Around a million people were served by 11 Roman aqueducts by the 3rd century CE, when the first one was constructed in 312 BCE. Subsequently, additional towns and cities across the empire also had aqueducts. Some of these buildings' marvels are still in use in partly today, after decades of carefully maintenance. Next is we have the Tuscan order. The Etruscan and Doric orders are the sources of inspiration for the Tuscan order, which is also referred to as Etruscan order. Tuscan columns are simpler and more rounded than Doric columns. The sides of the columns are smooth and unflotted, but the capitals have the same appearance. The Tuscan order employed proportions in its general construction to produce stocky but sturdy structures which were best suited for fortified places. Next one is the Colosseum. One of the most famous and identifiable structure in Rome is the Colosseum. Currently, the landmark welcomes millions of tourists, and it is just as closely associated with Rome as the Eiffel Tower is with Paris. The Colosseum is an oval, freestanding building with three stories of Roman arcade arches, a podium or platform on top, and the attic below. Half columns, of which the first story is Doric, the second is Ionic, the third one is Corinthian. The Colosseum took 72 years to build and took 80 years to finish. Originally intended to house gladiatorial matches, it also served as a venue for other spectacular events such as simulated sea wars, animal hunts, and combat reenactments. We are done on the examples of Roman architecture. So now let us know one of the famous architecture in Roman history. So we have here Vitruvius. When it comes to classical architecture, no one person was more influential than the Roman architect and engineer Vitruvius, the author of the Architectura, a treatise on architecture. Vitruvius defined the Roman ideal that all buildings should have three key attributes, so that are the strength, utility, and beauty. Vitruvius was influential on the topic of proportions in the architecture and the human body. The Greeks looked to the golden ratio for inspiration. Roman architecture, under the influence of Vitruvius, turned to the proportion of the body. Vitruvius' description on human proportion in the Architectura led to Da Vinci's famous illustration of the Vitruvian Man. Vitruvius lived from approximately 70 BCE to 15 CE, although he is sometimes considered the first architect. This misnomer, however, his work is the first surviving record in the history of architecture. So here are the characteristics of Roman architecture. First is we have concrete structures, arches, domes, columns, buttresses, designed based on symmetry and equal proportions. Here are the summary of our discussion for today, which is the preference to circular architecture. That ends our discussion for today for the preference to circular architecture under the Classicism and the Greco-Roman tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you have learned a lot from this discussion. Once again, my name is Ian. Have a great day ahead.